I raised a daughter. I did not raise a predator.
I used to think I'd die in that house, not from old age, but from the silence that slowly killed all trust. My husband had passed. Most of my friends were gone, and my daughter, the same little girl who once sobbed into my chest when she scraped her knees, was now quietly erasing me from my own life. My name is Lorraine Whitaker. I'm 73, a widow, a retired history teacher in Charleston, South Carolina. For decades, I taught people how to recognize the mistakes of the past, but somehow, I forgot to teach myself. 3 months ago, I moved in with my daughter, Madeline. She said she missed me, said the kids wanted their grandma around more, and I believed her. I really did. Until the nighttime tea started making me drowsier than usual, until I noticed I was signing papers I didn't fully remember reading, and until the day a woman from Adult Protective Services knocked on our front door and said they'd received an anonymous report. Filed by my own daughter. They tried to say I was confused, that I was slipping. But I wasn't losing my mind. They just didn't expect me to still have one thing left: my memory, my instinct, and the legal deed to the land that very house was sitting on. This isn't just a story about family. This is a warning to anyone who's ever been hurt by someone with your last name. If you've ever felt manipulated, ignored, or pushed out of the very home you helped build, then this story is for you. Because some battles aren't fought with fists or fury. Some are fought in silence, with quiet strength, and the will to be heard. My name is Lorraine Whitaker. I'm 73, a widow, a retired high school teacher from Charleston, South Carolina, where the sun always feels like a warm memory, and the wind whispers things I'm no longer sure I still hear. For years, I lived alone in a small, 2-bedroom house, about 15 minutes from downtown. White picket fence, purple bougainvillea climbing the porch rails, and a lazy cat named Newton who spent most of his life sunbathing. I wasn't frail. I still did my own grocery shopping, filed my taxes, and brewed peppermint tea every evening in the porcelain teapot my husband gave me when I retired. He died 7 years ago, a heart attack, sudden, right in the middle of our 40th wedding anniversary. Since then, I'd chosen a quiet life. Not unhappy, not lonely, just quiet and enough. Everything started to shift the day Madeline, my daughter, called me. It was early September. Late afternoon. Her voice was brisk as always, decisive. But this time, there was something softer underneath. Mom, it's time to let us take care of you. You've done enough. You've carried everything for so long. Let me carry something now. I had no reason to doubt her. Madeline is my only child. I nursed her through fevers, waited in the rain outside school, clipped her newspaper articles when she was named Employee of the Month in the local real estate magazine. I've always been proud of her. Always. She lives with her husband, Craig Nolan, a polished man, always in crisp shirts, and a voice so measured, you'd think every word had been screened before it left his mouth. Craig worked in finance. I didn't fully understand what he did, just that it involved a lot of calls, documents, and advice about asset management. Madeline said they had a spare room, that Ellie and James, the grandkids, missed me, that if I moved in, we'd all be closer. Someone would be there if I caught a cold. Someone could drive me to the doctor. I thought, maybe this is how you close the distance of all those years. Maybe I've been alone long enough. They picked me up on a Sunday morning. Shiny SUV, friendly smiles. Craig carried my suitcase. Madeline opened the door. The kids came running arms wide. Their home was in a newly built gated community, big backyard. Room for barbecues. My bedroom had lavender sheets, my favorite color, and on the nightstand, a framed photo from Madeline's college graduation, just the two of us. I stood there, suitcase still in hand, and told myself, maybe this is a new beginning. Maybe there's still love here. I didn't know then that the room, the sheets, even the evening tea they brought me, they weren't about care. They were part of a plan, not to protect me, but to take everything from me. At first, everything felt peaceful. There was hot tea every morning, laughter from the kids echoing down the hallway after school, and warm dinners in a kitchen soaked in golden light. Madeline would sit with me and share stories from the office. Tough clients, endless meetings, her voice animated like when she was young, telling me about her day at school. Craig spoke less. He usually came home late, but always polite, always smiling, always said, "Thank you," when I passed the soup or refilled his glass. But then, I started noticing things. Dinner conversations began to shift, less about Ellie's school or old black and white movies I loved, and more about interest rates, investment portfolios, and asset transfers. Phrases like assets under management, tax optimization, estate efficiency. One evening, I was rinsing dishes in the sink when Craig walked in. He dried his hands, leaned casually against the kitchen island, and said, "You know, Mom, if we set up a family trust now, everything will be simpler later on. It's just easier for tax purposes. You don't need the stress at your age." I smiled gently, pretending I didn't fully understand. But something in me went cold. Family trust. I'd taught that phrase once in a community finance class for parents. It wasn't a bad thing. But if you weren't careful, it could become a tool. A quiet way to shift ownership without ever asking the person who built the life being shifted. I didn't say anything that night, but from that moment on, I started listening closer. I heard Madeline whispering to Craig in their home office. "She's still sharp. We have to go slow." I heard the printer whirring at 2 a.m., the sound of zippers opening and closing. One morning, I came down the stairs earlier than usual and caught Craig in the kitchen, reviewing a thick stack of papers. I caught the logo on top before he flipped it over. It was from my bank. I faked a yawn, said I wasn't feeling well, went back upstairs. But I didn't sleep that night. Not even a little. I wasn't sure anymore whether I was living in my daughter's house or inside a plan that had already been written for me. The next morning, I asked Madeline, casually, "Do you need me to come with you to notarize anything?" She froze for half a second, then smiled quickly. No, Mom, don't worry. We're just helping you organize things. Just in case something ever happens." That phrase came up more and more, just in case. Just in case I fell. Just in case I forgot. Just in case I couldn't care for myself anymore. The thing is, I never asked anyone to take care of anything for me, and slowly I began to understand the affection in this house came with conditions. The kindness felt rehearsed. The words, carefully placed. The smiles measured. And so I started remembering, writing things down, not just on paper, but in my gut, where truth settles long before words ever catch up. At first, I wasn't sure. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe I was just getting old. The way they hinted, with voices too soft and eyes too careful. But then I began to take notes. Not on paper. With my body. My body had always told me when something was wrong, not by misfiring, but by racing, faster, hotter. Every night, Madeline brought me tea, chamomile, my favorite. But about 2 weeks after I moved in, I noticed it was getting harder to wake up in the mornings. My mind felt foggy. My limbs, heavy. One time, I slept nearly 11 hours, and still felt dizzy. So one night, I swapped the tea. Made my own glass of water in the kitchen. I drank it, went to bed. And in the morning, for the first time in days, I woke up clear-headed, eyes sharp, thoughts crisp. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask Madeline why the teacup remained full the next day, untouched, and why she didn't mention it. I just started watching closer. One Saturday morning, I found a folder laid neatly on the dining table, coffee brewing, warm scones on a plate. But what chilled me was the bold title on the second page, Authorization of Durable Financial Power of Attorney. Below it, a blank signature line, highlighted in yellow, ready, waiting. Next to it, a blue ink pen, the exact kind I used. Craig strolled into the kitchen, calm as ever, took a bite of a scone and said, "It's just a sample, Mom. No rush. Just think about it. It's safer this way." I nodded gently, then slid the papers into my robe pocket. The next morning, around 9 a.m., I was about to water the garden when the doorbell rang. Before I could get there, Madeline rushed ahead. I heard the door open, a stranger's voice. Hello, I'm from Adult Protective Services. We received a referral from a family member. Just here for a quick wellness check. I froze at the base of the stairs. A woman in a blue button-down stood outside, clipboard in hand. Eyes alert. Craig stood nearby, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Madeline's voice had changed. Softer, gentler, her hands nervously clasped like she was reciting lines from memory. The woman turned to me and asked, "Do you know why I'm here today, ma'am?" I took a long, slow breath. Oh, I knew. I knew better than anyone in that house. I invited her in, made the tea this time myself. No one touched their cups, and for the next 35 minutes I spoke, clearly, calmly, precisely. I told her about managing my own bank account, about the books I read each week, about remembering the phone numbers of every neighbor on our street. I spoke about teaching, and the last history lesson I ever gave. She took notes. She asked follow-ups, and then she left. No accusations, no conclusions, but her eyes had changed. She saw, she knew, and I, at that moment, knew something too. The game had truly begun. Ever since the woman from Adult Protective Services walked out that door, I knew. I didn't have time to wait anymore. I've lived long enough to understand some battles don't require fists or shouting, just precision and silence. A silence that's deliberate, that knows exactly what it's doing. That night, I pulled a small wooden box from the bottom of my suitcase. The one Craig always called clutter. Useless junk. Inside was a mini USB camera. A gift from a fellow teacher back when I taught chemistry. We used it to monitor lab experiments when students weren't looking. I plugged it into the garage outlet, angled right at the tool shelf, where Craig often made phone calls, thinking no one could hear. 3 days later, the first recording appeared. Craig was on the phone, his voice low, confident, cold. "We're almost there." She still hesitates, but April's working on her. Once we get her signature, we can move forward. She won't even remember this in a few months. I rewound it. Listened again. No doubt. None. I saved the audio to a separate USB and hid it in the sugar jar on the kitchen shelf. The one no one touched because Madeline and Craig were both on keto. Then I moved to the next step, the land documents. Since I was young, I kept copies of every important paper. Notarized, dated, sealed. I pulled out an old file from my suitcase, sat on my bed, and read through them. Page 8. There it was. The land title to 441 Willow Bend Drive, where Madeline and Craig currently lived, signed by me, gifted to Madeline for use, but never legally transferred. It was part of a verbal agreement between me and my late husband to help our daughter start her life, but with boundaries. Legally, I was still the owner, still the one whose name was on the deed. I didn't laugh bitterly, just softly. A quiet smile, because now I knew I had never really lost everything. That same night, I changed all my passwords, email, bank, even my library card. Enabled 2-factor authentication. Set alerts for every login attempt. I printed out a list of all accounts. 2 copies. 1 in the house. 1 in my coat pocket. Then I called my old lawyer. Didn't say much. Just asked him to update the file on personal asset protection and independent ownership rights. Madeline didn't suspect a thing. Craig still smiled politely at dinner. But I wasn't the same. I no longer drank the tea they brought. I never let my handbag out of sight. I carried a notebook everywhere I went, jotting down everything, every detail. Not to be paranoid, but to remember, to act. Because I've learned something. Deception doesn't begin with a blow. It begins with trust. Trust that's weaponized. And this time, I would not stay silent and lose everything. I had evidence. I had the truth. And more importantly, I had started to reclaim ownership of my life. I called my old attorney, Richard Haynes, on a quiet Thursday morning. I didn't have to explain much. Just said, "Richard, I need to revisit the 2001 transfer agreement. Willow Bend property, and I need to deal directly. No intermediaries." There was a 2-second pause. Then his voice came steady. "I'll expect you at 10 a.m. Bring everything. Richard isn't the kind of man who asks unnecessary questions. He handled my late husband's legal matters, and mine, for over 30 years. He knew we never moved unless there was a reason. When I stepped into his office, the file was already on the desk. A cup of peppermint tea beside it. No sugar, just the way I've always liked it. I didn't sit right away. Instead, I placed the USB stick on his desk, unzipped my bag, and laid out a printout of the garage recording, a photo of the unsigned power of attorney form, a screenshot of an unfamiliar email from my bank. Richard put on his reading glasses. Looked at me carefully. You gathered all this by yourself. I nodded. I'm not losing my memory, Richard. I'm just tired of pretending I didn't notice. One sentence. That's all it took. He leaned back, nodded slowly, like he was witnessing someone he once thought would never need to fight. Finally take the gloves off. We reviewed the 2001 deed transfer, tucked into the footnotes. At my husband's insistence years ago, was this clause. Property retention rights apply for humanitarian intent, including enforcement of personal protection in cases of suspected familial abuse. I never thought I'd need it. But that day, I thanked the past for thinking ahead. We activated the clause immediately, filed notice with the county recorder's office, and submitted a formal petition for an investigation into unauthorized access. Not just financial, but also medical. Richard reached out to the hospital where Madeline had volunteered years ago. As I suspected, 2 instances of unauthorized access to my medical file were traced back to an old staff account. One of them, a login Craig used when he helped me fill out paperwork for my annual checkup. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I wouldn't act. They thought I was too old to go digging through old documents, too slow to read the fine print, too out of touch to save audio to a flash drive. But they were wrong. Because when I walked out of Richard's office that day, I wasn't just Lorraine Whitaker. Mother. Widow. The quiet woman with a shelf full of gardening books. I was the one holding every card. And this time, I wasn't letting go. My voice didn't need to be loud. The evidence would speak for me. And if someone asked what I'd lost during this whole ordeal, I'd tell them. I didn't lose my memory. I just got tired of pretending I didn't see what was right in front of me. Now I see everything, and I've started taking back everything they thought they'd stolen. I left at 4:45 in the morning. The sky was still dark. The city hadn't woken up yet. The only sound was the wind brushing through the pine trees on the porch. Craig didn't wake, Madeline didn't come to the door, and I didn't leave a note. All I left was silence. One small suitcase, not just filled with clothes, but with documents, printed files, a USB drive, and an external hard drive I secretly backed up the night before. I left the house keys exactly where they always kept them. On the side table by the door, as if I were just stepping out for a walk around the block, but I wasn't going anywhere nearby. I asked an old friend, Mary Ann, to drive me out of Charleston. We didn't talk much. She looked at me through the rearview mirror and simply asked, Frag finally crossed the line, didn't he? I didn't answer. I just tightened my grip on my bag, a silent yes. The destination was Eleanor's old cabin outside Somerville, my late sister's house. 2 stories, gray roof, weathered blue shutters. I'd kept the key and paid the taxes all these years, but never imagined I'd return there to hide. Yet somehow, it was the only place I felt safe. The house didn't have Wi-Fi, but it had electricity, water, and peace. And that was more than enough to launch a counterattack. I powered on my laptop, used a temporary Wi-Fi dongle to access my secure email. Everything I had gathered over the last few weeks, the garage recording of Craig's phone call, screenshots of suspicious emails, unsigned documents, was compiled into an 18-page report. I sent it to the South Carolina Office of Financial Investigation with a single subject line. Elder financial exploitation, suspected identity, fraud case, Craig Nolan. 2 days later, I received a reply from an investigator named Catherine Wu. She confirmed my case would be taken seriously. My identity would remain confidential during the preliminary review. Then she added, "This isn't the first time Mr. Nolan's name has come up." 3 days later, an initial investigation was launched. And the truth began to surface. 4 times, Craig had used my identity 4 separate times to access financial accounts, including my bank, retirement funds, and a fixed investment. Each instance traced back to the IP address of his office. Each one included a voice clip identifying as Lorraine Whitaker. But it was never my voice. They sent me a summary of the findings. I wasn't shocked. I just felt lighter. Because I was no longer the only one who knew the truth. But I didn't stop there. I contacted the South Carolina Elder Law Support Center, explained everything, sent them my evidence, and asked for independent legal assistance. The counselor on the line, her name was Sasha, said, "You're doing everything right, Mrs. Whitaker. You're not alone anymore. And this time we'll help you fight back." For the first time in months, I heard exactly what I needed. I was not alone. I printed 3 full copies of every document, one for my attorney, one for the legal center, and one tucked neatly into the kitchen drawer right below Eleanor's old silverware. I knew Craig would try to control the story. But this time, I was 1 step ahead, and I wouldn't stop until the truth, every last piece of it, stood in the light. Berkeley County Family Court. A weathered red brick courthouse, modest in size, unimposing in stature, but on that day, it became the place where the truth was finally put on record. Craig and Madeline had been formally summoned, under the joint recommendation of the state's Elder Protection Center and the South Carolina Financial Crimes Investigation Office. There were no cameras, no press, just a cold room, worn leather chairs, a handful of observers, and a silence so heavy it swallowed the air. I arrived early. In my hands was a single evidence binder, numbered, tabbed, and meticulously organized. Each page, a sliver of truth I had lived with, recorded, and protected over the course of weeks, maybe even longer. Craig entered first. Crisp shirt, neat tie, but his eyes scanned the room like he was still trying to control the narrative. Madeline followed behind. Her hair pinned up high, briefcase in hand, her face colder than the last time I'd seen her in the kitchen. She didn't look at me. Not even for a second. Then, the hearing began. My attorney laid it all out. The garage recording. Craig's voice crystal clear. "Once we get her signature, we can move forward. She won't even remember this." The hidden living room footage. Craig presenting the full authority. Paperwork saying, "Just sign here, Mom. You don't even have to read it." The unauthorized access to my medical records traced back to Craig's office IP. The failed bank transfer, flagged by the bank's fraud detection system, along with a recorded call in which Craig impersonated my voice. And finally, a signed statement from my family doctor confirming I was of sound mind, with no cognitive impairment whatsoever. Contrary to what Craig had claimed, Craig said nothing. Madeline bit her lip. Their lawyer tried to request a recess to review the validity of the evidence. The judge denied it. "All evidence is admissible, clear, and traceable. We will proceed." When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, slow but steady. I didn't read from notes. I spoke in my own voice, not loud, not trembling, but certain. There was a time I believed I was the vulnerable one, that I had to sit quietly while my name, my dignity, and even my memory were being stripped away. But today, I stand here not for vengeance, but for people like me. Mothers who loved too blindly, who trusted blood over logic. I raised a daughter. I did not raise a predator. No one spoke. Even the judge paused for several long seconds, eyes lifted, still. Then she said, "This court finds sufficient evidence of calculated manipulation, attempted financial coercion, and abuse of familial trust." She ruled immediately. All financial documents involving Craig and Madeline were nullified. Full legal control over my assets was restored, and the case was referred to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation. I walked out of that courtroom without looking back. It wasn't victory I felt, not pride, but something quieter, like rising from a wound and realizing you didn't die in it. After the trial, I didn't go back to Charleston. I returned to the old retreat house in Somerville. Quiet, weathered, and the kind of place no one would seek out unless they had a reason to. The house didn't have modern amenities. But every morning, I'd boil water by hand, make my tea, and sit on the porch, breathing in something I had forgotten how to feel: freedom. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post online. I didn't frame my victory as a story worth bragging about. I simply knew one thing. I was still here. And I still had my voice. And that became the reason for my next decision. I wouldn't let my story end inside a courtroom. I wanted it to become a key, not to unlock the past, but to open the door for other women to step out of their own silence. A few weeks later, I officially launched a nonprofit, the Whitaker Voice Project, not because I thought I was special, but because I knew too many women like me. Women who sat at the kitchen table late at night, holding a teacup full of doubt, too afraid to ask what their children were really planning. Mothers who signed papers they never read, grandmothers labeled, too weak to fight back, women who raised entire families, only to be erased from them. The Whitaker Voice Project was created to stand against that. We began with a small team of volunteer attorneys and a 24/7 anonymous hotline. Then we opened free financial literacy classes, designed specifically for women over 60. No tech background, no family support, just courage and worth. I still remember our very first meeting, 6 women, sitting on plastic chairs in a community library room. One woman raised her hand, her voice trembling. I was asked to sign over my property, but I didn't understand what it meant. When I asked questions, my son yelled at me. The room went silent. Then I spoke. You're not wrong for wanting to understand. What's wrong is someone taking advantage of you, because you don't. That night, we chose our slogan, a simple line that speaks louder than any threat, louder than any shame. Dignity is not negotiable. The Whitaker Voice Project isn't big. We don't get much funding. We're not featured in glossy magazines. But every time a woman calls or emails just to ask how to verify her assets, or simply wants to be heard, I know we're doing something right. I can't rewrite the past. And I no longer need my daughter to apologize. I just need to know that, every time I use my voice, another woman somewhere will stop believing she has to suffer in silence. Because sometimes, the strongest act isn't taking someone to court. It's refusing to lose your voice, and giving it back to someone who lost theirs a long time ago. The letter arrived on a quiet Friday afternoon. It was placed neatly in the mailbox by the front porch. No postmark, no stamp, no printed return address. Just a folded piece of paper, handwritten in round, black ink. The same handwriting I once corrected when she was in 4th grade. Mom, if you could grant me a meeting. Just once. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just need to ask one thing. Madeline. I read it, set it down on the table, and sat in silence for a long while. Not because I was emotional, not because I was angry, but because I didn't feel anything at all. We met that Sunday morning at a small cafe in the old district, the same place I once took her for waffles on her 10th birthday. She arrived early, dressed plainly, no makeup. When she saw me, she stood up, as if to speak, but didn't. I sat down, quietly. A few minutes passed before she finally said, I read the article, about your project, about the women you've helped, about how you stood up and kept everything. I'm not here to ask for anything. I just want to know, did you ever think you were wrong? For not telling me sooner, for keeping it all to yourself. I set down my cup of tea and looked her in the eyes. Wrong, maybe. But if you were a mother, and you knew everything you said would be used against you, you'd stay silent too. I didn't stay quiet because I was weak. I stayed quiet to protect the last scraps of love I had left. Madeline bowed her head. One tear slid down her hand. She didn't wipe it. She said nothing. I exhaled slowly, opened my bag, and pulled out a thin folder, already notarized, already prepared. You asked what you could do to make things right. Here's your answer. I slid the folder across the table. It's a full waiver of inheritance, unconditional. She stared at me, still, silent. If you truly want to atone, then don't hold power over the rest of my life. More importantly, signing this will send a message that protects other women from the same kind of manipulation you once used against me. Madeline looked up, eyes red, no begging, no protest. She took the pen, she signed, not a word. I nodded, placed the folder back in my bag, stood. Before I walked away, I looked at her one last time, not with blame, but with final recognition. I don't hate you, Madeline, but I don't belong to you anymore. And I stepped outside. The air was turning crisp. Faint sunlight spilled across the sidewalk in broken shadows of trees. I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I just knew one thing, crystal clear. I had taken back my voice. And this time, no one would ever take it from me again. The first morning, after my final meeting with Madeline, I woke up without wondering what I needed to brace for that day. No more pre-printed documents laid out on the breakfast table. No more late night cups of tea poured by hands I no longer trusted. No more soft, spoken voices whispering behind me as I reached for paperwork. Just me, and the stillness of a house I had truly chosen to stay in. I began my new life slowly, one breath, one step at a time. Every Monday, I taught basic financial literacy to older women at a small church down the block. Women who used to say things like, "I let my husband handle everything," or, "That's for the kids to take care of." Now they were learning how to check their bank balances, read home contracts, and ask questions at the bank, without shame, without fear. They didn't need to become financial experts. They just needed enough knowledge to stop being prey. I spent time in the garden, too. The patch of weeds behind Eleanor's house. Now it held tomatoes, scallions, sage, and a small lavender bush. Not to sell, not to impress, just so I could step outside each morning, bend down, and breathe in the scent of soil that belonged to me. In quiet moments, I wrote. Not for a publisher, just a personal memoir. My own record of a woman who once spent 30 years teaching, who believed in the good in everyone, who was turned into an asset by her own family, and who finally reclaimed her voice. The first page reads, "We don't need to be famous to be respected. We just need to stop living in fear. I'm no longer angry. I no longer wish for guilt or harsher punishment. Justice isn't about making others hurt like you did. It's about living without letting your wounds define who you are." Sometimes, I get handwritten letters from the women in my class. They tell me about the first time they refused to sign a shady paper, the first time they asked the bank to explain their interest rate, or simply, the first time they felt they had the right to ask. I read every letter. No one knows how many times I've cried out of joy. The kind of joy that doesn't come from a courtroom verdict, but from knowing you did the right thing and are still doing it. I don't need the world to know my name. I don't need the press to call me a symbol of anything. I only need one thing: peace. And for me, after everything I've lost and everything I've reclaimed, peace has never been a small thing. That afternoon, the sky turned a warm shade of amber. I sat on an old wooden chair at the far end of the porch, the spot where I could watch the sun disappear behind the tall, time-worn oaks. On my lap was my unfinished memoir, pages worn thin at the edges from being turned over night after night. I wrote the final line, slowly, clearly, without crossing anything out. For every woman who's ever been silenced, you never needed to scream. You just needed to be heard. I set the pen down and looked out at the yard slowly filling with shadows. My life has never been a string of victories. It's been a string of getting back up when no one was standing beside me, of tears no one ever saw, of quiet dinners at a table set for one, because dignity doesn't require an audience. I used to think silence was grace. I was taught that to love your child, to be a good mother, a wife, an aging woman, meant learning when to hold your tongue to keep the peace. But now I understand love, that demands your silence, isn't love, and growing older does not mean giving up your right to the truth. We live in a world where the elderly are often seen as burdens, too slow to understand, better off letting the younger generation handle everything. But somewhere out there are women like me, who've seen the dismissive looks, heard the lies dressed up as concern, and still chose to hold on to their strength. No one ever taught me how to defend myself from my own family. No one prepared me for the day the person I loved most would put profit above blood. But sometimes, in those barest, most brutal moments, you learn something. The greatest legacy you leave behind isn't money, land, or reputation. It's the brave decision to protect yourself, even if that means standing up to your own. Now, I don't care what label the world gives me. A victim, a whistleblower, a betrayed mother. All of those titles are smaller than one unshakable truth. I am still me, and my voice still belongs to me. If you're listening to this, and you've ever been made to believe you're too old to change, or too weak to fight back, remember, love that demands silence isn't love. And aging doesn't mean surrendering your voice. Sometimes, simply standing up for yourself is how you write a new chapter. Not just for you, but for every woman who comes after,